The rain fell steadily on the cemetery, droplets sliding down the polished surface of Ethan Monroe's casket. Rachel Monroe stood motionless, her black dress soaked at the hem, her daughter Ava's small hand clutching hers tightly. Neither spoke as the casket was lowered into the ground. 3 days ago, Ethan had been alive. Now all that remained were memories and a hole in the earth that could never be filled. Rachel and Ava pulled into the driveway of their home, the windshield wipers still fighting against the relentless rain. The house looked exactly as they had left it that morning. The porch light Rachel had forgotten to turn off, the recycling bin still on the curb, Ethan's gardening gloves on the porch railing where he'd left them last weekend. "Can we have hot chocolate when we get inside?" Ava asked, her voice small but hopeful, seeking comfort in the familiar. "Of course, sweetheart," Rachel replied, reaching for her purse. With extra marshmallows, they hurried through the rain to the front door, Rachel fumbling with her house key, her fingers still numb from the cold cemetery grounds. She inserted the key into the lock and turned. Nothing happened. Frowning, Rachel tried again, jiggling the key slightly as she sometimes needed to do when the old lock was being stubborn. Still nothing. "Is something wrong?" Ava asked, huddling closer to her mother under the narrow shelter of the porch. "I think the lock might be jammed," Rachel said, trying to keep her voice steady. She had dealt with so much already today. A stuck lock seemed like a cruel joke from the universe. Rachel glanced at the window beside the door, hoping to see if maybe the latch on the back door was still open as it sometimes was when Ethan forgot to close it properly. What she saw instead made her blood run cold. The white linen curtains she had hemmed by hand last spring were gone. In their place hung floral drapes she had never seen before, heavy, ornate things with tasseled edges that looked like they belonged in a different decade. "Mom?" Ava's voice wavered as she followed her mother's gaze. "Those aren't our curtains." Rachel felt a surge of adrenaline replace her fatigue. She pressed her face closer to the glass, peering into her own living room. What she saw made no sense. There were boxes stacked where their couch should be, and sitting in Rachel's reading chair, casually sipping from a teacup, was Diana Monroe, Ethan's mother. Beside her, arranging throw pillows on the love seat, was Joseline, Ethan's younger sister. Both women were still dressed in their funeral clothes, as if they had rushed here directly after the service, a service where they had hugged Rachel and offered condolences. Rachel's hand flew to the doorbell, pressing it repeatedly. When that produced no response, she began knocking, then pounding on the door with the flat of her hand. "What's happening, Mom?" Ava asked, her voice rising in panic. "Why are Grandma and Aunt Joseline in our house?" Before Rachel could form a response, the door opened a crack, the security chain still in place. Diana's face appeared in the narrow opening, her expression neutral, almost bored. "Rachel," she said, her voice flat, "I thought you'd be staying at a hotel." Rachel's mouth opened and closed, words failing her momentarily. "A hotel? Diana, this is my home. Our home." She gestured to Ava, who was partially hidden behind her. "Please open the door. We're soaked, and Ava needs to get inside." Diana's eyes flickered to Ava briefly, then back to Rachel. "I'm afraid that won't be possible." "What are you talking about?" Rachel's voice rose. "Let us in right now." "No," Diana replied coldly. "It was Ethan's home, and now that he's gone, it belongs to his family. You're no longer part of that." Rachel felt as if she'd been slapped. "We are his family. I'm his wife, and this is his daughter." "You were his wife," Diana corrected. "And without a will specifying otherwise, this property reverts to his legal next of kin. That's me." Rachel shook her head in disbelief. "That's not how it works, Diana. The house is in both our names. Now open this door before I call the police." "Go ahead," Diana replied with a thin smile. "I have the deed right here. The mortgage was in Ethan's name. You were just the wife." "Mom?" Ava whispered, tugging at Rachel's sleeve. "What's happening?" Rachel squared her shoulders, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "Diana, don't do this. Not today." Not to Ava. For a moment, something flickered in Diana's eyes, perhaps doubt or even shame, but it was quickly replaced by hard resolve. "You should have thought about Ava's security before you married my son without a prenup. We both know you were after his money from the beginning." "What money?" Rachel exclaimed. "Ethan was an accountant at a small firm. We lived paycheck to paycheck for years." "And whose fault was that?" Diana hissed. "You and your expensive taste, that fancy design degree that never paid the bills." Behind Diana, Joseline appeared, placing a hand on her mother's shoulder. "Mom, maybe we should let Ava in at least. She can stay in the guest room until we figure things out." Diana hesitated, then shook her head. "No, she goes with her mother. That's best for everyone." Rachel felt Ava's grip on her arm tighten painfully. "We'll go," Rachel said, staring directly at Diana. "But this was your biggest mistake." She turned, placing an arm around Ava's shoulders, and guided her daughter back to the car. Once inside, with the doors closed against the rain and the curious eyes of Diana watching from the window, Ava burst into tears. "Why is Grandma being so mean? Where are we going to go? All my stuff is in there. Dad's pictures are in there." Rachel pulled her daughter close, her own tears mixing with the raindrops on her face. I don't know why she's doing this, sweetheart, but I promise you, we will get our home back. Everything that's ours, everything that was Dad's, we'll get it back. How? Ava sobbed. Rachel started the car, her mind racing through possibilities. They could go to a hotel for tonight, as Diana had so callously suggested. But with what money? Rachel had spent nearly everything on the funeral arrangements, expecting to sort through their finances once she had a moment to breathe. We'll go to Mrs. Bennett's, she decided aloud, referring to their elderly neighbor who had been bringing them dinner every night since Ethan's death. Just for tonight, and tomorrow, we'll figure this out. As they backed out of the driveway, Rachel caught a glimpse of Jocelyn in the window, now hanging what looked like one of Diana's gaudy landscape paintings where Rachel and Ethan's wedding portrait had once been. You said this was Grandma's biggest mistake, Ava said quietly as they drove the short distance to Mrs. Bennett's house. What did you mean? Rachel gripped the steering wheel tighter. She thinks she knows everything about your dad and me. She thinks she can just take what's ours because she's his mother. But there are things Diana Monroe doesn't know, things your father made sure of just in case. She trailed off, not wanting to burden Ava with her suspicions about Diana's long-standing jealousy or the measures Ethan had taken years ago when his mother had tried to interfere in their marriage. Mrs. Bennett welcomed them with open arms, her weathered face creasing with concern when Rachel explained, in simplified terms, that there was a misunderstanding about the house and they needed a place to stay for the night. Of course, Mrs. Bennett said, already pulling extra blankets from a closet for the fold-out couch. Stay as long as you need. I told Harold last week, God rest his soul, that Diana Monroe was at your place awful quick after the ambulance came. Bringing boxes she was. Said she was helping organize. Didn't seem right to me. Rachel felt a chill. She was bringing boxes to our house while Ethan was still in the hospital. Mrs. Bennett nodded solemnly. The day before he passed, said she was helping you get organized for the difficult days ahead. Her words, not mine. Rachel sat heavily on the edge of the couch. Diana had been planning this, even before Ethan died. The thought made her physically ill. You get some rest, Mrs. One-on-Sis, Bennett said, patting Rachel's shoulder. Things always look different in the morning light. But morning brought no relief, only the stark reality of their situation. Rachel woke early, her body stiff from the uncomfortable couch, her mind immediately flooded with the dual grief of losing Ethan and their home. Ava was still sleeping, curled tightly around a throw pillow, her face puffy from crying herself to sleep. Rachel slipped outside to make a phone call, not wanting to wake either Ava or Mrs. Bennett. She called the only lawyer she knew personally, her college roommate Angela, who now practiced real estate law in the neighboring town. They can't just change the locks and claim the house, Angela assured her after hearing the situation. Regardless of whose name is on the mortgage, marital property doesn't work that way. And if you've been living there, making payments, you have tenant rights at minimum. But what if the mortgage really is only in Ethan's name? Rachel asked, remembering with a sinking feeling that in the early years of their marriage, when they first bought the house, her credit had been poor due to student loans. And we don't have a will. We kept meaning to make one, but even without a will as his spouse, you have inheritance rights that supersede his mother's claims in most cases, Angela explained. But Rachel, I need to see the documents, the deed, the mortgage paperwork, anything related to the property. Do you have copies? Rachel closed her eyes, thinking, they're in Ethan's office, in the filing cabinet, in the house, Angela concluded. That's problematic. I need to get back in there, Rachel said, resolve hardening within her. Today. No, you need to let me handle this legally, Angela cautioned. Breaking in would only… I wouldn't be breaking in, Rachel interrupted. It's my house. And there might be another way in. After ending the call with promises to meet Angela later that day, Rachel went back inside to find Ava awake and helping Mrs. Bennett make pancakes. The elderly woman had found an old backpack and was filling it with snacks and a change of clothes she'd managed to scrounge up. I called my friend Teresa down the street. Mrs. Bennett was saying to Ava, her granddaughter is about your size, and she's bringing over some things for you to borrow until we can get your clothes back. Rachel felt a rush of gratitude for the woman's kindness. Mrs. Bennett, I can't thank you enough. Nonsense, the older woman replied. Ethan was like a son to me after Harold passed, always shoveling my walk, fixing things around the house. This is the least I can do. After breakfast, Rachel explained to Ava that she needed to go back to the house to get some important papers. Can I come? Ava asked immediately. I want to get some of Dad's things. And Marshmallow. She was referring to the stuffed cat Ethan had given her when she was 5, a constant companion that had been left behind in yesterday's hasty exit. Rachel shook her head. Not this time, sweetheart. I don't want you to have to see Grandma like this. I'll get Marshmallow for you, I promise. Reluctantly, Ava agreed to stay with Mrs. Roddy. Bennett and Rachel set off on foot, taking the long way around the block to approach their house from the back alley. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, reflecting Rachel's mood as she made her way cautiously through the narrow alleyway behind their row of houses. She knew what she was about to do might technically be considered breaking and entering, if Diana had already changed the locks, as seemed likely, but she didn't care. This was her home, and somewhere inside were the documents that would prove it. Rachel reached the back of their property and slipped through the gate into the yard. Everything looked surreally normal. Ethan's half-finished birdhouse project on the patio table, Ava's bicycle leaning against the fence, the herb garden Rachel had planted last spring now sprouting early shoots of rosemary and thyme. She approached the back door cautiously, knowing that the side laundry entrance had a broken latch that Ethan had been meaning to fix. He'd placed a wooden dowel in the track to secure it, but if Diana and Jocelyn didn't know about that particular quirk of the house, Rachel slid the glass door along its track, and sure enough, there was no resistance. Either they hadn't discovered the broken latch yet, or they hadn't bothered to secure it. She stepped inside, into the small laundry room off the kitchen, and was immediately hit with a wave of emotion. The house smelled different. Some floral air freshener Diana must have sprayed liberally throughout the rooms, attempting to erase the scent of the family who had lived there for 14 years. Moving silently, Rachel made her way through the kitchen. She could hear voices from the living room, Diana on the phone, her tone businesslike as she discussed clearing out the old furniture and updating this dreary decor. Rachel slipped down the hallway toward Ethan's home office, grateful that Diana and Jocelyn were distracted. The door was closed but unlocked, and she eased it open, half expecting to find the room already ransacked. To her surprise, Ethan's office appeared untouched. His desk was still cluttered with the papers he'd been working on before his heart attack, tax forms for a client, a half-completed Sudoku puzzle, a mug of coffee now grown moldy. It was as if this room had been preserved in amber, a snapshot of Ethan's last normal day. Rachel moved quickly to the filing cabinet, pulling open the drawer marked Home. Inside were folders neatly labeled in Ethan's precise handwriting: mortgage, insurance, repairs, warranties. She grabbed the mortgage folder first, flipping it open to scan the documents inside. What she saw made her breath catch. There, on the most recent mortgage statement, was her name alongside Ethan's, not just as his wife, but as the primary borrower. The refinancing she had done 2 years ago, when Ethan's small accounting business had nearly gone under, the one she had handled herself to spare him the stress during his health scare. Diana was wrong. The house wasn't solely in Ethan's name, it was primarily in Rachel's name. She continued searching, gathering insurance documents and property tax statements that all listed her as either the primary or co-owner. As she was about to close the drawer, a black folder caught her eye, one she didn't recognize. It was labeled simply, "Postnup, do not discard," in Ethan's handwriting. Rachel pulled it out, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a document she had never seen before, a postnuptial agreement, signed and notarized 3 years ago, specifying that in the event of Ethan's death, all jointly held assets, including the house, would transfer exclusively to Rachel Monroe. Attached was a handwritten note from Ethan. "Rachel, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Mom has probably tried something. She never forgave me for choosing you over the family business, for choosing love over obligation. This postnup should protect you and Ava from any claims she might make. Show this to a lawyer immediately if she tries anything. Protect Ava. Protect yourself. I love you both more than anything. Ethan." Rachel pressed the note to her chest, tears flowing freely now. Even from beyond, Ethan was protecting them. He had known what his mother was capable of, and had prepared for the worst. She was so absorbed in her discovery that she didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway until it was too late. The office door swung open, and Jocelyn stood there, a laundry basket in her hands, her expression shifting from surprise to alarm. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "How did you get in?" Rachel quickly shoved the documents into her bag, standing to face her sister-in-law. "This is my house, Jocelyn. I don't need permission to be here." "Mom," Jocelyn called, backing into the hallway. "She's in Ethan's office." Rachel heard Diana's quick footsteps approaching and knew she had only seconds. She scanned the room for anything else she might need, her eyes landing on a framed photo of the three of them, Rachel, Ethan, and Ava, taken last summer at the lake. She grabbed it, along with Ethan's worn leather wallet from the desk drawer, and turned to face her mother-in-law. Diana appeared in the doorway, her face contorted with anger. "You broke in? I could have you arrested. For entering my own home?" Rachel replied calmly, holding up the mortgage statement. "The home that's in my name, not Ethan's? I just came to collect some documents, Diana. Documents that will be very interesting to my lawyer." Diana's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Whatever you found won't matter. Ethan would have wanted his mother and sister to have his home, not the woman who dragged him away from his family. Is that what you think happened?" Rachel asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. After all these years, you still believe I somehow forced Ethan to love me, to build a life with me, to have a child with me. He chose this life, Diana. He chose us. And he knew exactly what you might try to do when he was gone. She held up the postnuptial agreement folder, watching as recognition and then alarm flashed across Diana's face. That's not real, Diana said quickly. He would never. It's notarized, witnessed, and completely legal, Rachel interrupted, and it specifically names me as the sole inheritor of this property and all other joint assets. Now, I'm going to leave peacefully, but I'll be back, with my lawyer and possibly the police. She moved toward the door, half expecting Diana to physically block her path. Instead, the older woman stepped aside, her expression now calculating. You think this is over? Diana asked quietly. You think some paper will protect you? Ethan wasn't in his right mind when he signed that. Anyone could see he was being manipulated. Rachel paused in the doorway. By all means, Diana, take that argument to court. I'm sure a judge will be very interested in how you broke into my home and changed the locks while I was at my husband's funeral with my 12-year-old daughter. As Rachel walked down the hallway toward the laundry room exit, Jocelyn called after her. You left the back door unlocked when you rushed to the hospital. We figured you wouldn't mind us settling in. Rachel turned back one last time. You know what, Jocelyn? I don't think either of you ever really knew your son and brother. If you did, you'd know he valued loyalty and love above all else. And he would be ashamed of what you've done. With that, she left, clutching the precious documents to her chest, her heart pounding but her resolve strengthened. As she walked back to Mrs. Bennett's house, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced since receiving the call about Ethan's collapse: hope. When Ava saw her mother return, she ran to her, eyes searching Rachel's face for news. Did you get marshmallow? Rachel shook her head apologetically. I couldn't this time, sweetie, but I found something even more important. She held up the folder. Your dad left us a way to fight back. Rachel sat at Mrs. Bennett's kitchen table that evening, poring over the documents she'd recovered while Ava slept on the fold-out couch in the living room. The more she examined the paperwork, the more she understood just how prepared Ethan had been for this possibility. The postnuptial agreement was comprehensive, covering not just the house but their joint bank accounts, retirement funds, and even specifying that Ethan's life insurance policy, a modest sum that would help Rachel keep them afloat for a while, was to go entirely to her, with no claims possible from extended family. But what struck Rachel most was the refinancing documentation from 2 years ago. As she stared at her own signature on the mortgage papers, memories of that difficult time came flooding back. It had started with chest pains. Ethan, barely 40, had been working 16-hour days trying to keep his small accounting practice afloat after losing his biggest client. The stress had manifested physically, sharp pains that sent him to the emergency room one night, leaving Rachel terrified that she might lose him. It wasn't a heart attack, thankfully, just severe anxiety and exhaustion. But the doctor's warning had been clear. Ethan needed to reduce his stress immediately, or next time it might be much worse. Rachel remembered the night after they returned from the hospital. Ethan had sat at this very kitchen table, head in his hands, bills spread out before him. I've failed you, he'd said, his voice breaking. The business is going under. We might lose the house. Rachel had sat beside him, taking his hand. We're not going to lose anything. We'll figure this out together. But she had seen the mortgage statement. They were 3 months behind, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. Ethan's small business had been their primary income since Rachel had put her interior design career on hold when Ava was born. They had savings, but not enough. That night, after Ethan had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, Rachel had made a decision. She still had contacts in the design world, colleagues who occasionally reached out with freelance opportunities that she usually declined. She picked up the phone. Within a week, she had lined up 3 remote design projects, enough work to bring in some immediate income while Ethan recovered. She worked at night, after Ava was in bed, creating design boards, sourcing materials, consulting with clients via video calls. But the mortgage was the immediate problem. Rachel called the bank herself, explaining the situation. To her surprise, given her design income and the equity they had in the home, she qualified to refinance the mortgage in her name alone, using her savings as a down payment to reduce the monthly obligation. She hadn't told Ethan. He believed the bank had granted them a temporary reprieve due to medical hardship, and Rachel let him believe it. It wasn't about taking credit. It was about protecting his health, his pride. He was already struggling with feeling like he had failed as a provider. Learning that his wife had saved their home might have been one more blow to his self-esteem during an already fragile time. For 2 years, Rachel had carried that secret, paying the mortgage from her design earnings, watching as Ethan slowly rebuilt his accounting practice, never letting on that she had been the one to save them from financial ruin. And now, that secret had become her strongest weapon against Diana's attempts to steal their home. Mrs. Bennett placed a cup of tea in front of Rachel, pulling her from her memories. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the elderly woman observed. Rachel smiled faintly. "In a way I have. I'm seeing Ethan in these papers, seeing how much he cared for us, how much he wanted to protect us. He knew his mother might try something like this someday." "Diana Monroe never thought any woman was good enough for her son," Mrs. Bennett said, settling into the chair across from Rachel. "I remember when you two first moved in. She came by with a housewarming gift, one of those awful paintings she collects, and spent the whole time pointing out everything wrong with the place. 'The kitchen's too small for a growing family,' she said, as if it was your fault the house wasn't a mansion." Rachel laughed softly, remembering. She offered to pay for renovations, but only if Ethan would come back to work for the family investment firm. He refused. He always refused her attempts to control him. "That's why she resented you," Mrs. Bennett said wisely. "Before you, she could manipulate him. After you, he had the strength to stand up to her." Rachel stared into her tea, considering this. "I never saw it that way. I always thought she just didn't like me personally." "Oh, it wasn't personal," Mrs. Bennett assured her. "Diana would have hated any woman who took her son away. You were just unlucky enough to be the one he fell in love with." The next morning, Rachel met with Angela at her law office, Ava in tow since Mrs. Bennett had a doctor's appointment. The girl sat quietly in the corner of the conference room, wearing borrowed clothes that were slightly too big, clutching a drawing pad Angela had given her. "This is quite a situation," Angela said, examining the documents Rachel had recovered. "But honestly, Rachel, I think we're in good shape legally. The postnuptial agreement is clear and properly executed. The mortgage is primarily in your name, and their actions, changing the locks while you were at the funeral, will not play well with a judge. So we can go back home?" Ava asked, looking up hopefully. Angela's expression softened. "It's not quite that simple, sweetheart. We need to file some paperwork first, maybe have a hearing. But yes, I believe you'll be back home soon." "How soon?" Rachel pressed. "We can't impose on Mrs. H.E. Bennett indefinitely, and a hotel is." She trailed off, not wanting to admit in front of Ava that a hotel was financially out of reach at the moment. "I understand," Angela said. "Let me make a few calls. We might be able to get an emergency hearing as early as tomorrow. In the meantime," she hesitated, then reached for her purse. "Let me lend you something to help with immediate expenses." Rachel started to protest, but Angela held up a hand. "Consider it a retainer refund. Your case is so straightforward, I won't need as many hours as we initially discussed." It was a kind fiction, and Rachel accepted the check gratefully, knowing it would cover a few nights in a modest hotel if necessary. When they left Angela's office, Rachel took Ava to a diner for lunch, a small splurge that felt necessary after the days they'd had. As they waited for their food, Rachel noticed her daughter staring out the window, unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" Rachel asked gently. Ava turned to her, eyes serious. "Why does Grandma hate us?" The question caught Rachel off guard. "She doesn't hate you, Ava. She could never hate you. You're Ethan's daughter." "But she kicked us out," Ava persisted. "On the day of Dad's funeral. That's evil." Rachel chose her words carefully. "Your grandmother is grieving, just like we are. Sometimes grief makes people do terrible things. And your grandmother, she's always had trouble sharing your dad's love. When he married me, when we had you, every time he chose our family over hers, it hurt her. That doesn't excuse what she's doing now, but it might help explain it." Ava considered this. "Dad always said Grandma was complicated." Rachel smiled sadly. "That was his polite way of putting it. Is that why he wrote that note? The one you found?" Rachel nodded. "Your dad knew his mother very well. He wanted to make sure we were protected if something ever happened to him." "He knew he was going to die?" Ava's voice trembled. No, Rachel assured her quickly. "But responsible parents. We try to plan for everything, even things we don't want to think about. That's all your dad was doing, being responsible, taking care of us, even if he couldn't be here." Ava nodded, seeming to accept this. She took a bite of her grilled cheese sandwich, then asked, "Can I help with the court stuff? I could tell the judge about Grandma." Rachel reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But thank you for being so brave." Later that afternoon, as they were settling into their hotel room, a modest suite Angela had helped them book at a discounted rate. Rachel's phone rang. It was Angela, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Diana has filed a petition with the court," she said without preamble. "She's challenging the postnuptial agreement, claiming Ethan wasn't of sound mind when he signed it due to his health issues. She's also claiming you manipulated him into refinancing the mortgage in your name to steal his assets." Rachel sank onto the edge of the bed. "That's absurd. Ethan was perfectly fine mentally when the postnup was signed. It was 3 years ago, long before his heart problems. And the refinancing was to save the house, not steal it. I know that, and we'll prove it," Angela assured her. "But this means we're looking at a full hearing, not just an emergency order. It could take a week or two." "A week or two?" Rachel echoed, glancing at Ava. who was exploring the hotel room, testing the firmness of the beds. "We can't live in a hotel that long." "You might have to," Angela said grimly. "Unless you have family you can stay with." Rachel thought of her parents, both deceased, and her sister in California with her own financial struggles. "No, there's no one." "Then we'll figure something out about the hotel," Angela promised. "In the meantime, I need you to gather as much evidence as possible about Ethan's mental state 3 years ago. Photos, videos, anything that shows he was of sound mind. And evidence of his mother's behavior over the years. Did he ever document her interference?" Rachel thought back to the countless strained family gatherings, the passive-aggressive comments, the way Diana would call Ethan at all hours with emergencies that required his immediate attention. "Nothing documented," she admitted. "But there are people who witnessed it, friends, neighbors." "Get statements," Angela advised. "And Rachel, prepare yourself. This could get ugly. Diana seems determined to paint you as a gold digger who took advantage of her son." After ending the call, Rachel sat on the hotel bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the task ahead. It wasn't enough to be grieving her husband. Now she had to defend her character, her marriage, her very right to the life she and Ethan had built together. Ava climbed onto the bed beside her, resting her head on Rachel's shoulder. "Are we going to be okay, Mom?" Rachel put her arm around her daughter, pulling her close. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be more than okay. Your dad made sure of that." That night, as Ava slept in the adjoining room of their suite, Rachel opened her laptop and began the painful process of documenting their life together. She created a timeline of their relationship, from their first meeting at a charity auction to their last day together, annotating key events that demonstrated Ethan's sound judgment and the strength of their marriage. She wrote about the refinancing, explaining in detail why she had done it and why she hadn't told Ethan. She compiled a list of witnesses who could attest to Diana's controlling behavior over the years, friends who had observed uncomfortable interactions, colleagues of Ethan's who had seen him field demanding phone calls from his mother during work hours. Around midnight, she opened her email and found a message from Mrs. Bennett, sent an hour earlier. "Rachel, dear, I don't know if this helps, but last month Ethan helped me update my will. He mentioned he'd done the same for himself and you recently, said it was important to keep Diana from meddling. I thought it was odd then, but now I understand. He seemed perfectly fine to me, sharp as a tack, as always. I'd be happy to tell a judge that. Rest well, and give little Ava a hug from me." Rachel sat back, a small smile forming. Ethan had told Mrs. Bennett about updating his will, even though they hadn't actually done so. It was another piece of evidence that he had been thinking clearly about these matters, concerned about his mother's potential interference. She continued working well into the night, driven by a determination that surprised even her. This wasn't just about the house anymore, though that remained crucial. It was about honoring Ethan's wishes, protecting his legacy, and showing Ava that some battles were worth fighting, no matter how powerful the opponent. By the time Rachel finally closed her laptop and crawled into bed beside her sleeping daughter, she had compiled a comprehensive defense against Diana's accusations. As she drifted off to sleep, Ethan's words from the postnuptial note echoed in her mind. "Protect Ava. Protect yourself." And for the first time since his death, Rachel felt equal to that task. The courthouse loomed large and imposing, its stone steps still wet from an early morning shower. Rachel stood at the bottom, gripping Ava's hand tightly, her other hand clutching a portfolio containing all the evidence she and Angela had gathered over the past week. "Remember what we talked about?" Rachel said quietly to Ava. "You'll sit with Mrs. Bennett in the gallery. You don't have to say anything unless Angela calls you up." Ava nodded solemnly. She was dressed in her best clothes, finally retrieved from the house during a court-supervised visit 2 days earlier. The visit had been brief and tense, with Diana watching their every move as they collected essential items. Rachel had been heartbroken to see how different the house already looked. Family photos removed from walls, furniture rearranged, the scent of home replaced by Diana's overpowering floral air fresheners. "There they are, Mrs. L," Bennett murmured, nodding toward the top of the steps where Diana and Joseline stood with a man in an expensive suit, their lawyer, presumably. Rachel straightened her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. Angela had warned her that Diana had hired Martin Reynolds, one of the most aggressive estate attorneys in the county. His specialty was contesting wills and trusts, and he had a reputation for ruthless courtroom tactics. "Don't worry about Reynolds," Angela said, appearing beside them. "He's all bark in the hallway and strictly procedure in the courtroom. Judge Harmon doesn't tolerate theatrical antics." They made their way up the steps, Rachel deliberately keeping her gaze forward, not acknowledging Diana and Joseline until they were nearly at the top. Then, inevitably, they stood face to face. "Rachel," Diana said coolly, "I see you've brought Ava. Was that necessary?" "She's not the child or your granddaughter, Diana," Rachel replied evenly. "Her name is Ava, and yes, it was necessary. This hearing directly affects her home and her security." A home she could easily share with her grandmother, Diana said, a hint of manipulation entering her tone. My offer still stands. Ava is welcome to live with me. You're the one who's making this difficult. Before Rachel could respond, Reynolds stepped forward, extending his hand to Angela. Miss Kaminsky, always a pleasure to see you in court. Angela shook his hand briefly. Martin, I'm surprised to see you taking a case with such a clear outcome. Reynolds smiled thinly. Clear to you, perhaps. I find Mrs. Monroe's claims quite compelling. The court might be interested to learn how the younger Mrs. Braxton, Monroe, systematically isolated Ethan from his family, then took advantage of his health scare to gain control of his assets. Rachel felt anger flare hot in her chest, but Angela placed a calming hand on her arm. Save it for the judge, Martin, she said pleasantly. We have our own compelling narrative, one supported by actual evidence. They proceeded into the courthouse, separating in the hallway outside the courtroom. Mrs. Prasos and 5-105. Bennett took Ava to find seats, while Rachel and Angela huddled near a window, reviewing their strategy one final time. Remember, stay calm no matter what Reynolds says, Angela advised. He'll try to provoke an emotional response to make you appear unstable or manipulative. Don't give him what he wants. What about Ava? Rachel asked, glancing toward the courtroom doors. Do you really think you'll need to call her as a witness? Angela's expression turned serious. I hope not. But if Reynolds makes this about your character rather than the legal documents, having Ava speak about your relationship with Ethan might become necessary. Children are remarkably persuasive witnesses, especially when they're simply telling the truth. Inside the courtroom, Rachel was surprised to see several familiar faces, neighbors, friends from Ethan's office, even their family doctor. Angela had been busy gathering witnesses, it seemed. Diana and Jocelyn sat at the respondents' table with Reynolds, Diana already dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief in what Rachel recognized as her performative grief, the same show she had put on at family gatherings whenever she wanted Ethan's attention. Judge Harmon entered, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. After the court was called to order, she reviewed the case briefly, then looked up, her gaze direct and no nonsense. I've reviewed the filings from both parties, she began. Mrs. Diana Monroe claims that her son's post-nuptial agreement with his wife Rachel should be invalidated due to his compromised mental state, and that the refinancing of the family home was done without his informed consent. Mrs. Rachel Monroe maintains that both actions were legal, binding, and undertaken with her husband's full knowledge and approval. Is that an accurate summary? Both attorneys confirmed the judge's understanding, and the proceedings began in earnest. Reynolds went first, painting a picture of Ethan as a man dominated by his wife, pressured into signing legal documents while experiencing anxiety and stress-related health issues. Ethan Monroe was hospitalized for chest pains just weeks before his wife mysteriously refinanced their home, removing his name as primary mortgage holder, Reynolds emphasized. He was vulnerable, worried about providing for his family, and Mrs. Rachel Monroe took advantage of that vulnerability. She described a son who had been changed by his marriage, who had become distant from his loving family. Ethan always called me every Sunday, his whole life, Diana said, voice quavering. After his health scare 2 years ago, the calls became less frequent. Sometimes Rachel would answer and say he was resting or busy. I knew something was wrong. And the postnuptial agreement, Reynolds prompted. When did you learn about that? Only after his death, Diana replied. It was a shock. Ethan would never have intentionally arranged for his mother and sister to be left with nothing from his estate. Not the Ethan I raised. He must have been coerced. Throughout Diana's testimony, Rachel maintained a composed exterior, though internally she seethed at how skillfully her mother-in-law twisted the truth. Yes, Ethan's Sunday calls had become less frequent, because Diana had used them to criticize his choices and pressure him about the family business, adding to his stress during an already difficult time. Angela's cross-examination was precise and calm. Mrs. Monroe, you testified that you were very close to your son. How often did you visit their home in the last 5 years? Diana hesitated. Well, I was there for holidays, of course, and special occasions. So not weekly, not monthly? I wouldn't want to impose, Diana said defensively. I respected their privacy, yet you felt comfortable enough to enter their home and change the locks immediately after your son's funeral. Diana's expression hardened. The house belongs to the Monroe family. I was simply securing a family asset. A family asset, Angela repeated thoughtfully. Mrs. Rye for Sinchel HL R1 Sand, Monroe. Are you aware that your son's wife refinanced the mortgage specifically to save the house when foreclosure was threatened? That she used her own savings and income to preserve this family asset? She should have come to me if they needed money, Diana snapped, momentarily losing her practiced composure. I would have helped them. With conditions, no doubt, Angela suggested. Perhaps the same condition you'd placed on offers of financial assistance before, that Ethan return to the family business? Diana's silence was answer enough. Angela continued her methodical dismantling of Diana's claims, establishing through careful questioning that Diana had rarely been involved in the couple's day-to-day life, had never been present for any medical appointments or financial discussions, and was basing her claims about Ethan's mental state entirely on maternal intuition rather than observable facts. When it was Rachel's turn to testify, she felt a strange calm descend over her. She'd spent the past week anticipating this moment, rehearsing her responses with Angela, preparing for Reynolds' attempts to provoke her. Now that the moment had arrived, she found strength in the simple truth of her story. She explained the refinancing honestly, how Ethan's business troubles had threatened their home, how she had taken action to save it while sparing him additional stress during his recovery. "I didn't tell Ethan because I didn't want him to feel like he had failed us," Rachel said, her voice steady. "He was already blaming himself for the financial difficulties. Knowing that I had to use my savings to save our home would have devastated him at a time when his health was fragile. So you admit you acted behind his back?" Reynolds pressed during cross-examination. "I acted to protect our family," Rachel corrected. "And when his business recovered, Ethan assumed the bank had given us a forbearance. I let him believe that because the outcome was what mattered, we kept our home and his health improved." "How convenient," Reynolds remarked. "A secret refinancing that your husband never knew about, which now benefits you tremendously." "There was nothing convenient about watching my husband struggle with health issues brought on by stress," Rachel replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. "Nothing convenient about working design jobs at night after spending all day homeschooling our daughter during the pandemic. I did what I had to do for our family. That's not manipulation. That's marriage." The testimony continued throughout the morning. The family doctor confirmed that while Ethan had experienced anxiety-related chest pains 2 years ago, his cognitive function had never been impaired. In fact, the doctor testified, "Ethan specifically discussed the postnuptial agreement with me during a checkup 3 years ago. He was clear-headed and quite deliberate about his decision." A colleague from Ethan's accounting firm testified to his meticulous nature and sound judgment, even during the business difficulties. "Ethan was stressed, not impaired," the man emphasized. "There's a significant difference." By the midday recess, Rachel felt cautiously optimistic. Their evidence was strong, and Diana's claims were being systematically undermined. During the break, Rachel and Ava ate sandwiches on a bench outside the courthouse, trying to maintain normalcy in the midst of the surreal legal battle. "You're doing great, Mom," Ava said, surprising Rachel with her perception. "Grandma looks angry. That's how you can tell we're winning." Rachel smiled, touched by her daughter's support. "It's not about winning or losing, sweetheart. It's about making sure the truth is heard." When court resumed, Angela called her final witness, Mrs. Proskett Bennett, who testified about her conversation with Ethan regarding estate planning. He specifically mentioned wanting to protect his wife and daughter from his mother's interference. The elderly woman stated firmly, "His words, not mine. He was perfectly sound of mind, helped me understand my own will that very day." As Mrs. Bennett stepped down, Angela addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we have established through multiple witnesses that Ethan Monroe was of sound mind when he executed the postnuptial agreement, that the refinancing of the family home by Rachel Monroe was a responsible action taken to preserve the family's primary residence, and that Ethan Monroe had expressed concerns about his mother's potential interference in the event of his death. The documentary evidence supports all these points." Judge Harmon nodded. "Mr. Reynolds, do you have any rebuttal witnesses?" Reynolds conferred briefly with Diana, then stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Ava Monroe to the stand." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Angela immediately objected. "Your Honor, Ava is 12 years old and has just lost her father. Subjecting her to questioning serves no legitimate purpose in this proceeding." "Your Honor," Reynolds countered, "the minor child lived in the home. She would have observed her parents' interactions and could provide valuable insights into their relationship dynamic." Judge Harmon looked thoughtful. "I'm hesitant to involve a child in these proceedings unless absolutely necessary. What specific information do you believe she possesses that hasn't been addressed by other witnesses?" Reynolds hesitated, clearly not expecting to have to justify his request so specifically. "The child might have observed signs of manipulation or control by her mother that adult witnesses wouldn't have seen." The judge's expression hardened. "Mr. Reynolds, I find that suggestion inappropriate and potentially harmful to the child. Unless you can articulate a specific, relevant reason to call this 12-year-old girl who recently lost her father, I am inclined to deny your request." Before Reynolds could respond, Ava stood up in the gallery. "I want to talk," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the suddenly silent courtroom. Rachel turned, startled, as did everyone else. Ava stepped into the aisle, her shoulders back, her expression determined in a way that painfully reminded Rachel of Ethan. "Ava, you don't have to do this," Rachel said quietly. "I know," Ava replied, "but I want to." Judge Harmon studied the girl thoughtfully, then nodded. Very well, but I will closely monitor the questioning, and I reserve the right to end your testimony at any point if I believe it's becoming detrimental to your well-being. Understood? Ava nodded and made her way to the witness stand. After being sworn in, a simplified version of the oath, given her age, she sat straight-backed, looking small but resolute. Reynolds approached carefully, clearly recalibrating his strategy. Ava, thank you for speaking with us today. I know this must be difficult. I just have a few simple questions about your mom and dad. Is that okay? Ava nodded, watching him warily. Did your parents argue a lot? Sometimes, Ava answered honestly. Usually about small stuff like who forgot to buy milk or whose turn it was to help me with homework. Dad said that's normal in a marriage. Did your mother ever pressure your father? Make him do things he didn't want to do? Ava considered this. Mom made Dad eat vegetables even though he hated Brussels sprouts. And she made him go to the doctor when he had chest pains, even though he said it was just heartburn. A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the courtroom. Reynolds pressed on. What about bigger decisions? Did your mother ever make demands about money or the house? No, Ava said simply. Mom was always the one saying we didn't need expensive stuff. When Dad wanted to buy me a fancy bike for my birthday, Mom said my old one was fine. Dad won that argument though. She smiled slightly at the memory. Reynolds changed tactics. Ava, did you know your mother refinanced your house without telling your father? Angela started to object, but Judge Harmon held up a hand, waiting to see how Ava would respond. I didn't know then, Ava replied, but Mom told me about it after we found Dad's papers. She saved our house when Dad got sick. She never told anyone, but she saved us. The simple statement, delivered with absolute conviction, seemed to hang in the air. Rachel felt tears spring to her eyes at her daughter's uncomplicated understanding of what had happened. Reynolds had no further questions, and Angela wisely kept her redirect brief, asking only about Ethan's relationship with his mother. Grandma always wanted Dad to call her and visit more, Ava explained, but sometimes after they talked, Dad would be upset. Once I heard him tell Mom that Grandma knew exactly how to make him feel guilty about abandoning the family legacy, whatever that means. And how did your parents seem together, especially in the last few years? Angela asked gently. Ava's face softened. Happy mostly. They had a special signal. When one of them was stressed or sad, they'd squeeze the other's hand 3 times. It meant, I am here. I saw them do it all the time, especially when Dad was worried about work. They were a team. After Ava stepped down, returning to sit with Mrs. Reeses, Bennett, the judge called for closing arguments. Reynolds emphasized Diana's maternal concern and questioned Rachel's secretive actions regarding the refinancing. Angela countered with a clear recitation of the legal facts. The postnuptial agreement was valid. The mortgage was primarily in Rachel's name, and the evidence overwhelmingly supported Rachel's account of events. Judge Harmon took less than 30 minutes to return with her decision. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, she began, I find no basis for invalidating the postnuptial agreement between Ethan and Rachel Monroe. It was properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. Multiple credible witnesses have testified to Ethan Monroe's sound mental state at the time of signing. Diana's face tightened as the judge continued. Regarding the refinancing of the family home, the documentation clearly shows that Rachel Monroe acted legally and, by all accounts, with the intention of preserving the family residence during a time of financial hardship. The mortgage is legally in her name, and she has made all payments consistently. The judge looked directly at Diana. Mrs. Diana Monroe, while I sympathize with your grief at the loss of your son, your actions in changing the locks and attempting to take possession of the property were legally unjustified. The house legally belongs to Rachel Monroe. Furthermore, your allegations about her character appear to be without merit, particularly in light of testimony from multiple witnesses, including your own granddaughter. She turned to Rachel. Mrs. Rachel Monroe, you are entitled to immediate restoration of your home and all contents. I am also issuing a temporary restraining order preventing Diana and Jocelyn Monroe from entering the property without your express permission. With a final tap of her gavel, Judge Harmon concluded, case dismissed. The courtroom erupted in subdued conversation. Rachel felt Angela's hand on her shoulder, squeezing in congratulation, but her eyes were on Ava, who was making her way through the gallery to her mother's side. We won? Ava asked, as if needing confirmation. Rachel nodded, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. We won. We can go home. Over Ava's shoulder, Rachel caught Diana's gaze, cold, unflinching, promising that this wasn't truly over. But for now, at least, they had their home back. And, in his own way, Ethan had protected them from beyond the grave. The locksmith finished installing the new deadbolt, handed Rachel 2 shiny keys, and packed up his tools. All set, Mrs. Hove. Monroe, not even the Pentagon could get through this lock without a key or a battering ram. Rachel thanked him, closing the door behind him as he left. She stood in the entryway of her home, truly hers again, and took a deep breath. It had been 3 days since the court ruling, and they were still settling back in, erasing the marks Diana and Jocelyn had left during their brief occupation. The house felt different now, weighted with both memory and absence. Ethan's presence lingered in every corner, his coffee mug still in the dish drainer, his reading glasses on the side table, his shoes by the back door. But the space was also irrevocably changed by what had happened since his death. "Mom?" Ava called from upstairs. "Can you help me hang Dad's picture back up?" Rachel climbed the stairs to find Ava in her bedroom, trying to balance a framed family photo on a nail that had been moved during Diana's redecorating efforts. "Let me," Rachel said, taking the heavy frame and carefully positioning it. The photograph showed the three of them at the beach last summer, squinting into the sun, arms around each other, unaware that it would be their last vacation together. "Perfect." Ava stepped back, studying the photo critically. "I want to put up more pictures of Dad," she decided, "all over the house, so we don't forget what he looked like." Rachel smiled softly, touched by her daughter's determination to preserve Ethan's memory. "That's a wonderful idea. We have albums full of photos in the closet. We could create a whole gallery wall." They spent the afternoon sorting through years of family photographs, selecting their favorites to frame and display. The activity was both painful and healing, each image a reminder of what they had lost, but also of the beautiful life they had shared. "Look at this one," Ava said, holding up a photo of Ethan teaching her to ride a bike, his face a mixture of pride and anxiety as he prepared to let go of the seat. "He was so worried I would fall." "He was always your protector," Rachel agreed, "even when you didn't need protecting anymore." As they worked, Rachel was struck by how their home was gradually returning to normal, or at least, a new version of normal. Diana's heavy floral curtains had been replaced with Rachel's simple linens. The ostentatious paintings had been removed, the furniture returned to its original arrangement. Even the lingering scent of Diana's overpowering air freshener was fading, replaced by the familiar smells of their own cooking and Ethan's favorite sandalwood candles, which Rachel had begun lighting in the evenings. The physical restoration of their home seemed to parallel their emotional recovery. They weren't moving on from Ethan. Rachel hated that phrase, but they were learning to live alongside his absence, to carry him with them in a way that honored rather than paralyzed. The doorbell rang as they were arranging the selected photos on the dining room table. Rachel tensed instinctively, still half expecting Diana to appear despite the restraining order. "I'll get it," she told Ava, moving quickly to the front door. Through the peephole, she saw not Diana but a delivery person holding a large arrangement of flowers. Cautiously, Rachel opened the door. "Yes?" "Delivery for Rachel Monroe," the young man said cheerfully, extending the elaborate bouquet. Rachel accepted it with a puzzled thank you, closing the door with her hip as she carried the flowers to the kitchen. The arrangement was expensive and tasteful: white lilies, deep blue hydrangeas, and sprigs of lavender. Not Diana's style at all. "Who are those from?" Ava asked, appearing in the doorway. Rachel found the small envelope tucked among the blooms and opened it. The note inside read simply, "Thinking of you both during this difficult time. Forgive me for not reaching out sooner. With deepest sympathy, James Monroe." "James Monroe?" Ava read over her shoulder. "Who's that?" Rachel smiled faintly, memories surfacing. "Your grandfather, Ethan's father. He and Diana have been divorced for almost 20 years. He lives in Arizona now." "I've never met him," Ava said, frowning slightly. "No, you haven't," Rachel confirmed. "He and your dad weren't close. Diana got full custody in the divorce and she made it difficult for James to maintain a relationship with Ethan. By the time your dad was an adult, too much time had passed. They exchanged birthday cards, Christmas calls, but not much more." "Did he come to the funeral?" Ava asked. Rachel shook her head. "I sent him a note about Ethan's death, but I didn't hear back. I assumed he couldn't make the trip. He's in his 70s now, and it's a long way from Arizona." "Do you think Grandma Diana told him about the court case?" "I doubt it," Rachel said, arranging the flowers in a vase. "Diana rarely mentioned James, and when she did, it wasn't kindly. I'm not sure they've spoken in years." The flowers brought an unexpected brightness to the kitchen, a reminder that there were connections beyond the immediate circle of pain and conflict they'd been living in. Later that evening, as they were finishing dinner, Rachel's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Warily, she answered. "Rachel, this is James Monroe. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." Rachel was momentarily speechless. In 14 years of marriage to Ethan, she had met James only twice, at their wedding and at a brief, awkward lunch 7 years ago when he had been passing through town. He had always been polite but distant, a man who seemed uncertain of his place in his son's life. "James," she finally managed. "No, it's fine. Thank you for the flowers. They're beautiful." "It's the least I could do," he replied, his voice rough with what might have been emotion. "I wanted to be at the funeral, but my health. Traveling isn't easy these days. I've been following everything from afar, though." My neighbor's daughter works at the county clerk's office. She told me about the court case with Diana. Rachel moved to the living room for privacy, leaving Ava to finish her dinner. It's been challenging, she admitted. Diana always was a force of nature, James said dryly, and not the gentle kind, more tornado than spring shower. Despite everything, Rachel found herself smiling at the apt description. That's one way to put it. I'm sorry you and the girl, Ava, right, had to deal with her at her worst. Diana never could handle loss well. When her father died, she tried to contest the will to prevent her brother from inheriting his share. When her beloved dog died, she sued the veterinarian. It's how she processes grief, by finding someone to blame. That doesn't excuse what she did, Rachel said, more sharply than she intended. No, it certainly doesn't, James agreed. Nothing excuses locking a widow and child out of their home. I just wanted you to know. It's not personal. It's Diana. She would have done this to anyone Ethan married. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. James shared stories of Ethan as a boy, stories Rachel had never heard, of a curious child who loved insects and building elaborate forts, who once set up a detective agency in the garage and solemnly investigated the case of the missing garden gnome. Diana had thrown it away because she thought it was tacky, but told Ethan it had been stolen by gnome nappers. He was always so serious about justice, James recalled fondly. Even at 8 years old, if something wasn't fair, he couldn't let it go. That never changed, Rachel said softly. It's why he became an accountant, oddly enough. He said numbers never lie. They're either right or wrong, balanced or unbalanced. He liked that certainty. Before ending the call, James asked if he could visit sometime. I'd like to meet my granddaughter properly, and to pay my respects to Ethan, even if it's just at his grave. Rachel surprised herself by agreeing readily. I think Ava would like that, and Ethan would have too, despite everything. He always said you got the raw end of the deal with Diana. After hanging up, Rachel found Ava in the dining room, carefully arranging their selected photos on the wall in a pattern only she understood. Was that really Grandpa James? She asked immediately. What did he say? Does he hate us like Grandma does? Rachel shook her head, smiling. No, quite the opposite. He wants to visit us, and he told me some stories about your dad when he was your age. Ava's eyes lit up. Really? What kind of stories? As Rachel recounted James's memories, she felt something in the house shift again, not back toward normal, but toward a new future, one that might include unexpected connections and healing. The following weekend, they hosted a small memorial service at the house for Ethan's close friends and colleagues, people who had been out of town during the funeral, or who wanted a more intimate way to say goodbye. Rachel had hesitated about holding the gathering, worried it might be too soon, but Ava had been enthusiastic. Dad would want people to remember him with snacks and stories, not just a funeral, she had declared with certainty. The gathering was small but warm. Ethan's colleagues from the accounting firm brought a framed photo of him at the company picnic, smiling broadly as he triumphantly held up the trophy from the three-legged race. Friends from their neighborhood shared memories of his legendary 4th of July barbecues and his patient coaching of the local children's soccer team, despite knowing almost nothing about the sport. Rachel moved through the rooms, accepting condolences, sharing stories, feeling Ethan's presence in the laughter and tears of those who had known him. It was a different kind of grief than the sharp pain of the funeral, a gentler, more communal remembrance that somehow made the house feel like home again. She was in the kitchen, refilling a tray of finger sandwiches, when Ava appeared at her side, tugging urgently at her sleeve. Mom, she whispered, her expression alarmed. Grandma Diana and Aunt Jocelyn are here. Rachel froze. What? Where? At the front door. Mrs. Bennett is talking to them, but Grandma keeps trying to look past her into the house. Rachel set down the tray with deliberate calm. The restraining order prevented Diana from entering the property without permission, but it didn't stop her from coming to the door. Legally, Diana couldn't be arrested unless she actually entered the house. Taking a deep breath, Rachel moved toward the front door, where Mrs. Rind Bennett was indeed engaged in what appeared to be a blocking maneuver, her small frame positioned squarely in the doorway as Diana attempted to peer around her. Just want to pay my respects, Diana was saying. As Ethan's mother, I have every right to be at his memorial. The invitation was quite specific. Mrs. Mother, Bennett replied firmly. And after what you did, Diana Monroe, you have no right to anything in this house, including sympathy. Rachel placed a gentle hand on Mrs. Bennett's shoulder. It's all right, Mrs. Bennett. I'll handle this. The elderly woman stepped aside reluctantly, giving Diana a final glare before returning to the gathering. Rachel stood in the doorway, her posture straight, her expression neutral. Diana was dressed impeccably as always, in a navy dress that managed to convey both mourning and authority. Beside her, Jocelyn looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting between her mother and Rachel. Diana, Rachel acknowledged coolly. Jocelyn, we came to pay our respects to my son, Diana announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The memorial notice was in the paper. Yes, I placed it there, Rachel replied. For Ethan's friends and colleagues, not for people who tried to steal his home from his wife and daughter. Diana's expression hardened. I am his mother. Nothing will ever change that, no matter what some judge says. No one is disputing your biological relationship to Ethan, Rachel said evenly. But being a mother is about more than DNA. It's about respect, support, and love without conditions. She paused, then added more quietly, Ethan loved you, Diana, despite everything. But he wouldn't have wanted you here today, not after what you did. You don't know what he would have wanted, Diana snapped, color rising in her cheeks. You were only married to him for 14 years. I raised him. I shaped who he became. Yes, you did, Rachel agreed unexpectedly. You shaped him so thoroughly that he spent his adult life ensuring you couldn't control him or the people he loved. The postnuptial agreement wasn't an accident or a manipulation, Diana. It was Ethan's deliberate choice, made because he knew exactly what you might do. Jocelyn stepped forward slightly. Rachel, please. We just want to say goodbye properly. Can't we put aside all this ugliness for one afternoon? For Ethan's sake? Rachel looked at her sister-in-law, seeing a hint of genuine grief in her eyes. Jocelyn had always been more follower than instigator, orbiting her mother like a planet unable to break free of a powerful gravitational pull. For a moment, Rachel considered relenting. Perhaps allowing them this small concession would bring some closure, allow everyone to move forward. But then she remembered standing in the rain with Ava, locked out of their own home just hours after burying Ethan. She remembered Diana's cold eyes at the courtroom, the lies she had told about Rachel's character, the attempt to paint Ethan as mentally unsound. No, Rachel said firmly, you're not welcome here. You tried to erase us, but we were always the ones holding this house together. Not you. This isn't over, Diana said, her voice low and threatening. You think some court ruling changes anything? This will always be Monroe property. My son's home. It's my home, Rachel corrected. Mine and Ava's, and we're not going anywhere. She closed the door gently but firmly, turning the new deadbolt with a satisfying click. When she turned back to the gathering, she found everyone pretending not to have been watching the confrontation. Only Ava approached immediately, her expression a mixture of concern and pride. You okay, Mom? Rachel nodded, surprised to discover it was true. The confrontation hadn't left her shaking or upset. Instead, she felt oddly peaceful. Standing up to Diana, calmly, without rage or bitterness, had been unexpectedly liberating. I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually. The memorial continued, the brief interruption soon forgotten as friends shared more stories, laughed, cried, and celebrated Ethan's life. By the time the last guest left, the house felt different again, full of memories and warmth rather than just absence and grief. That night, after Ava had gone to bed, Rachel sat in the living room with a glass of wine, looking at the photos they had arranged on the walls that afternoon. Ethan smiled from every frame, holding newborn Ava, coaching soccer, building a snowman, laughing at the beach. A life well lived, if too short. I did it, Ethan, she whispered to the empty room. I protected our home. I stood up to your mother. I hope you would be proud. The house creaked in response, the familiar settling sounds of an aging structure that had become, over time, not just a building but a sanctuary. Rachel finished her wine and was about to head upstairs when she noticed an envelope that had been slid under the front door. Frowning, she crossed the room and picked it up. No stamp, no name, just a plain white envelope, sealed tightly. With a growing sense of unease, Rachel opened it and removed a single sheet of paper bearing 6 typed words. This house will always be mine. She sat down heavily on the stairs, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. Diana's parting message, delivered after the confrontation at the door, was clear in its threatening simplicity. The legal battle was over, but the emotional war continued. Rachel's first instinct was fear, for herself, for Ava, for the fragile peace they were trying to rebuild. Her second was anger, a hot flash of indignation that Diana would continue to harass them even after the court ruling. But as she sat on the stairs, Ethan's photographs watching from the walls, a different emotion emerged. Pity. Diana Monroe, for all her wealth and status, was a deeply unhappy woman, unable to accept loss or relinquish control. Even in grief, she could only express herself through threats and manipulation. What a lonely existence that must be. Rachel folded the note carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Tomorrow, she would contact Angela about a more permanent restraining order. For tonight, though, she wouldn't let Diana's bitterness taint their home any further. As she climbed the stairs, she paused at Ava's partially open door, peering in to check on her daughter. Ava was asleep, one arm wrapped around the recently retrieved Marshmallow, the stuffed cat that had been her constant companion for years. On her nightstand sat a framed photo of Ethan, positioned so it would be the first thing she saw each morning. Despite everything, the loss, the betrayal, the threats, they were reclaiming their lives, one room, one memory, one day at a time. And in that reclamation, Rachel found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. 3 weeks after the memorial service, Rachel was sorting through boxes in Ethan's office, a task she had been avoiding since his death. Each drawer, each folder, each paper clip seemed to contain some echo of him, making the process both precious and painful. She had promised herself to tackle 1 box per day, a manageable approach to the overwhelming task of deciding what to keep, what to store, what to let go. Today's box, labeled simply MISC in Ethan's precise handwriting, contained an odd assortment of items: old business cards, conference lanyards, a broken watch he had inexplicably saved, and at the bottom, a leather-bound notebook she had never seen before. The notebook was well worn, its cover scratched and faded from years of handling. Opening it carefully, Rachel found that it was a garden journal, filled with Ethan's neat handwriting and detailed sketches of plant layouts, flower beds, and vegetable gardens. She hadn't known Ethan kept such a journal. Gardening had been a casual hobby for him, something he tinkered with on weekends. A tomato plant here, a rose bush there. Nothing that suggested the careful planning and artistic vision displayed in these pages. As she turned the pages, she noticed that the most recent entries, dated just weeks before his death, described plans for a children's garden. Specifically, a garden for Ava. There were sketches of raised beds in the shape of animals, a small pond with water lilies, a butterfly garden with carefully selected plants to attract monarchs and swallowtails. The final page contained a list titled Plants for Ava's Garden, with each item thoughtfully annotated. Marigolds, for protection and to keep pests away, just like a mother's love guards her child. Rosemary, for remembrance, so she never forgets where she came from. Sunflowers, to remind her to always turn her face to the light. Lavender, for peace during difficult times. Strawberries, because every child deserves sweetness in their life. Rachel ran her fingers over the words, tears blurring her vision. This had been Ethan's secret project, a garden he was planning to create for their daughter, each plant chosen with symbolic meaning, each design element crafted to bring joy and learning. "Mom?" Ava's voice called from downstairs. "Can you help me with this math problem?" "Coming," Rachel replied, carefully marking her place in the journal before heading downstairs. That evening, after Ava had gone to bed, Rachel returned to the garden journal, reading every entry from beginning to end. It was like discovering a new facet of Ethan, his observations about soil pH, his excitement over successfully growing heirloom tomatoes, his frustration when the deer ate his prized hostas. At breakfast the next morning, she showed the journal to Ava. "Look what I found in Dad's things." Ava leafed through the pages with growing wonder. "Dad was going to make me a special garden, with a pond and everything?" "Apparently so," Rachel smiled. "It was going to be a surprise." Ava traced the sketch of the butterfly garden with her finger. "Can we still make it, just the way he planned?" The question hung in the air, full of hope and possibility. Rachel realized that in all the weeks since Ethan's death, amidst the legal battles and emotional upheaval, they hadn't talked much about creating new things, only about preserving what already existed. "Yes," she decided, "we can make it together, as soon as the ground warms up enough for planting." The project gave them something to look forward to, a way to honor Ethan that felt active rather than passive. They spent evenings studying the journal, learning about the plants he had selected, researching what would grow best in their climate and soil. By early spring, they were ready to begin. Rachel cleared a section of the backyard according to Ethan's design, and together she and Ava marked out the beds with stakes and string. They purchased seedlings, soil amendments, and the materials for a small pond, investing in Ethan's vision with a fervor that felt almost like having him with them. On a warm Saturday in April, as they were preparing to plant the first bed, the one shaped like a rabbit, Ava paused, holding a marigold seedling in her dirt-covered hands. "Mom, remember that note? The scary one from Grandma?" Rachel nodded, surprised by the sudden reference. They hadn't spoken of Diana's threatening message in weeks. After consulting with Angela, Rachel had filed a police report documenting the harassment, but there had been no further contact from either Diana or Jocelyn. "What about it?" Rachel asked carefully. Ava looked thoughtful. "Can I burn it?" The request caught Rachel off guard. "Burn it? Why?" "In movies, when people want to, get rid of bad memories or curses or whatever, they burn the thing that's causing the problem." Ava shrugged, trying to appear casual, though her expression remained intense. "I thought maybe if we burn Grandma's note, it would be like saying we're not scared of her anymore." Rachel considered the idea. She had kept the note as evidence, but perhaps its purpose had been served. Maybe there was value in the ritual Ava was proposing, a symbolic rejection of Diana's continued attempts to claim ownership over their lives. "I have a better idea," Rachel said after a moment. "Let's plant it." "Plant it?" Ava's forehead wrinkled in confusion. "Yes, right here, beneath the marigolds." Rachel pointed to the center of the rabbit-shaped bed. Your dad wrote that marigolds are for protection, remember? So we'll put the note under them, and as the roots grow, they'll eventually break down the paper, turn something ugly into something that nourishes beauty." Ava's face lit up. "That's perfect." Rachel retrieved the note from her desk drawer, where it had been carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. Together, they dug a small hole in the center of the bed, placed the still-sealed envelope inside, and covered it with soil before planting a circle of bright orange marigolds above it. "Take that, Grandma," Ava whispered to the ground, patting the soil firmly around the last seedling. Over the next few weeks, the garden took shape according to Ethan's plans. The rabbit bed flourished with marigolds and strawberries. The butterfly garden, shaped like a giant wing, filled with lavender, coneflowers, and butterfly bushes. The small pond, though less ambitious than Ethan's original design, still managed to attract frogs and dragonflies within days of being filled. Rachel found herself experiencing a curious kind of dual grief as they worked, sorrow that Ethan wasn't there to see his vision realized, mixed with gratitude for this final gift he had left them, this project that gave purpose and joy to their healing. The garden became a living memorial, more vibrant and evolving than any stone marker could be. Neighbors stopped by to admire it, often sharing their own memories of Ethan as they walked the winding paths between the beds. Even Mrs. Bennett, now using a cane due to arthritis, made daily visits to check on the progress of the vegetables and report on butterfly sightings. As spring turned to summer, Rachel found other areas of her life beginning to flourish as well. She had hesitantly reached out to her old design contacts, offering her services for freelance projects. To her surprise, several responded immediately with job offers, impressed by the portfolio she had maintained even during her years of focus on family. Working from Ethan's old office, now transformed with her design boards and fabric samples, though his photos remained on the walls, Rachel found herself rediscovering a passion that had been dormant but never truly forgotten. The work was challenging and creative, a welcome counterpoint to the practical demands of single parenthood and home maintenance. Ava, too, seemed to be finding her way forward. The initial raw grief had mellowed into a kind of wistful remembrance. She still talked about Ethan daily, still kept his photo by her bed, but she also laughed more easily, engaged more fully with friends, and developed a passionate interest in gardening that would have delighted her father. James Monroe visited in July, a slightly stooped man with Ethan's eyes and tentative smile. The meeting was initially awkward. Too many years had passed, too many words left unsaid, but Ava's enthusiasm for showing him the garden broke the ice. By the end of his 3-day stay, a fragile bond had formed, built on shared memories of Ethan, and a mutual desire to create family connections rather than sever them. "You've built something remarkable here," James told Rachel on his last evening, as they sat on the porch watching Ava photograph a monarch butterfly that had landed on her lavender. Not just the garden, this home, this life for Ava. Ethan would be proud. Rachel nodded, accepting the compliment with a quiet, "Thank you." She had stopped qualifying her grief, stopped measuring her recovery against some imagined timeline. Some days were still impossibly hard. Others brought unexpected moments of joy. All of them, she was learning, were part of the same journey, not away from loss, but through it. In August, a certified letter arrived from an attorney Rachel didn't recognize. Inside was a formal notification that Diana Monroe had moved to Florida permanently and was relinquishing any further claims regarding Ethan's estate in the interest of family harmony and closure. The sudden capitulation was surprising but not entirely unexpected. James had mentioned during his visit that Diana's sister lived in Florida and had been urging her to relocate for years. Perhaps the distance had given Diana perspective, or perhaps she had simply found a new focus for her controlling tendencies. Whatever the reason, the letter marked the end of a chapter. Rachel filed it away without emotion, neither relieved nor vindicated. Diana had become over time less a looming threat and more a sad footnote to their story, a woman who had chosen bitterness over healing, control over connection. In September, as summer faded and the garden began its transition to fall, Rachel and Ava hosted a small gathering to celebrate what would have been Ethan's 43rd birthday. Friends and neighbors brought dishes to share, and they ate at tables set up along the garden paths, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, both literal and metaphorical. As twilight descended, Mrs. Bennett raised her glass in a toast. To Ethan, who planted seeds of love that continue to grow. To Ethan, the group echoed, glasses raised to the darkening sky. Later, after the guests had gone and Ava had gone to bed, Rachel sat alone in the garden, listening to the chorus of crickets and the gentle splashing of frogs in the pond. A nearly full moon illuminated the flower beds, turning the marigolds to silver and casting long shadows across the grass. In this peaceful moment, Rachel felt Ethan's absence not as a sharp pain but as a gentle awareness, like a familiar song playing in another room, distant but recognizable. He was gone, yet somehow still present in every bloom, every beam of the house, every laugh from Ava's lips. The threatening note, buried months ago beneath the marigolds, had long since begun its transformation, breaking down, becoming part of the soil that nourished the vibrant flowers above. Diana's attempt to claim ownership had been absorbed and transmuted, just as their grief was slowly being transformed into something else. Not happiness, exactly, but a kind of peace. The understanding that love, once planted, continues to grow in ways both seen and unseen. Rachel stood and stretched, ready to head inside to the home that was truly hers, not because of legal documents or court rulings, but because she had fought for it, nurtured it, filled it with memories both old and new. The house would always be part Ethan, but it was becoming something more as well, a place of healing, of growth, of unexpected beauty sprouting from the soil of loss. As she turned toward the back door, something caught her eye, a flash of movement near the butterfly garden. Probably just a late-season moth, she thought. Or perhaps, if she wanted to believe as Ethan might have, it was something more, a visitation, a blessing, a reminder that even in absence, love remains. Either way, Rachel smiled as she entered her home, locking the door securely behind her. Whatever tomorrow might bring, joy or sorrow, challenge or respite, she was ready to face it, rooted firmly in the life she and Ethan had built, the life she continued to nurture on her own. She didn't need revenge against Diana. She had peace, the kind you only earn when you protect your child, your truth, and your name, the kind that grows like marigolds from the most unexpected soil, reaching always toward the light. What would you have done in Rachel's situation? Would you have fought back as fiercely for your home and dignity? Or would you have taken a different path? Think about what you would say to someone facing a similar betrayal from family members during a time of grief. If this story resonated with you, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Rachel planted marigolds over Diana's threatening note, transforming something meant to harm into nourishment for beauty and growth. In many ways, this is the perfect metaphor for how we might approach the painful chapters of our own lives. We cannot always prevent betrayal or loss. We cannot control how others treat us in our most vulnerable moments, but we can decide what to do with those experiences, whether to let them poison our future or use them as fertilizer for something new and beautiful. In the garden of life, we are both the planters and the plants, capable of growing through concrete, blooming in unlikely places, and turning toward the light even after the darkest storms. May you find the strength to protect what matters, the wisdom to prepare for the unexpected, and the grace to plant marigolds over whatever threatens your peace. Until next time, remember that the most beautiful gardens often grow from the most challenging soil.